They had been high school sweethearts. 10 years together, 4 of them long distance, 2 of them spent rebuilding a future in a quiet New England town. The wedding had been meticulously planned, set to take place in a historic, ivy-wrapped chapel nestled at the edge of a small forest, where the trees leaned in just close enough to make you feel watched. The kind of place that looks beautiful in photos, but feels wrong in person. His name was Daniel. Quiet, dependable, a bit old-fashioned. She, Melanie, was the more outgoing one, the planner, the heartbeat of everything. Their families adored them. The groomsmen joked Daniel had practically been married to her since prom. He smiled quietly at the teasing. He didn't mind, or so everyone thought. The morning of the wedding, everything seemed perfect. Crisp air, soft, diffused sunlight. Guests began arriving early. The caterers were on time. Melanie was getting her makeup done in the bridal suite, humming nervously. She kept checking her phone, but not because she was worried. Daniel was always early, but 11 a.m. came and went. The ceremony was at noon, and Daniel hadn't arrived. Not to the chapel, not to the groom's room, not anywhere. His best man, Andrew, tried calling. No answer. The other groomsmen assumed Daniel was running late, maybe got stuck in traffic. But Daniel didn't run late. By 11:30, Melanie was pacing. Something was wrong. Daniel's phone was ringing, but no one was picking up. Andrew finally made the decision to drive to the cabin Daniel had rented nearby, the same one he'd stayed in the night before to follow tradition. It was only a 15-minute drive, tucked along a gravel road at the edge of the woods. When Andrew arrived, the door was unlocked. Inside, everything was neat. The tux was laid out on the bed, shoes polished, cufflinks still in their box. Daniel's wallet and car keys were on the nightstand. His phone was missing. What wasn't missing was a faint smell, like wet pine, and something else. Something sour. Andrew stepped outside and noticed footprints in the dirt. Daniel's boots, he assumed. They trailed off toward the woods behind the cabin. He followed them for about 20 feet before they vanished entirely, as if Daniel had simply lifted off the ground. By 12:15 p.m., the wedding was delayed. Melanie was trying not to panic. Andrew came back, pale, and told her what he'd seen. That's when her phone buzzed. A voice message from Daniel's number. She played it in front of everyone. It started with static, deep, crackling static, the kind that makes your chest vibrate. Then came Daniel's voice, but it wasn't right. It sounded distant, like he was in a tunnel or underwater. "I'm sorry, Mel. I'm so sorry. I thought I could go through with it. I really did. But something's wrong out here. Then silence. A thud, leaves crunching. A whisper, not Daniel's, low and close to the mic. "Stay with us." Then the call cut off. Melanie dropped the phone. No one moved. The authorities were called immediately. A search party combed the woods for 2 days. Dogs, drones, volunteers. Nothing. No trace of Daniel. Not even the boots that left the tracks. It was as if he had been erased, gently but completely. The phone pinged once more that night, at 3:03 a.m., from a cell tower 10 miles deeper into the forest. When rangers went to investigate, they found the remnants of an old hiking path that hadn't been used in years. Along the path were scattered objects, a broken watch, a wedding band engraved with the date of Melanie and Daniel's wedding, and a small cassette recorder. That was odd. Daniel hadn't owned one. The recorder had one tape inside, unlabeled. When played, it was the same message Melanie had received. Exactly the same. Same static. Same words. Same whisper. But this time, the message continued after the whisper. Faint breathing. Then, they always leave their hearts behind. You try to run. They all try. Another voice, one that sounded like a child. "Do you want to see where he went?" Then just wind. The police confiscated the tape. It never made it into the official report. Neither did the ring, or the fact that, according to Melanie, the voice that said "stay with us" matched something from Daniel's childhood nightmares, a voice he once described as the thing that lived behind trees when he was small. What followed was grief, panic, headlines in local papers. Groom vanishes on wedding day. Most people assumed cold feet, that he ran off, cracked under pressure, disappeared. But Melanie never accepted that. She knew him, knew his routines, his fears, his silences. He wasn't the type to ghost, and he had no reason to. They had planned everything together, down to the type of cake. Months passed. Melanie moved out of the town, tried to start over. But every now and then, around midnight, she'd get a call from an unlisted number. And every time it was just wind. Except once. She swore she heard Daniel whisper, "Don't come looking. It watches the ones who remember." She hung up and smashed the phone. To this day, no one knows what happened to Daniel. No body, no final message. Just one wedding, one forest, and a voice message that ended before anyone could finish saying goodbye. But those who visited the chapel since, the one right next to the woods, report the same thing. Static on their phones, even with no signal. And sometimes, if they listen closely, a voice breathing just beneath the wind. It was supposed to be a quiet seaside wedding. No more than 30 guests, most of them immediate family, gathered on a stretch of coastline in coastal Maine where the bride had grown up. The air was cool, the waves calm. The ceremony was simple, elegant, almost dreamlike. Her name was Elise. She wore no veil, just a crown of white roses, and her dress was vintage, a flowing, ivory lace gown that trailed slightly in the sand. Everyone said she looked serene, distant even, but beautiful. Her groom, Aaron, was clearly smitten. He couldn't stop looking at her, even when the officiant asked him to repeat the vows. He stumbled slightly, half laughing, half entranced. There was a stillness to Elise that some found poetic, others a little unsettling. Her eyes rarely left the ocean. The ceremony ended with applause. Elise smiled faintly. Photos were taken. Champagne was poured. And then, at some unspoken cue, Elise walked away from the crowd, barefoot, her dress catching the wind, and stepped into the tide. At first, people thought it was symbolic, some romantic gesture, maybe part of a tradition no one else had been told about. Her maid of honor even laughed nervously and said, "She always was dramatic." But Elise kept walking. The water reached her knees, then her waist, then her chest. People began to call out. Aaron sprinted after her, yelling her name. But by the time he reached the shoreline, she was gone beneath the waves. No splash, no struggle, just a ripple, and then silence. The Coast Guard was called immediately. Boats were sent. Divers scoured the area for hours. But Elise had vanished without a trace. The wedding turned into a search operation. The reception was canceled. Everyone left in stunned silence, murmuring about mental health, emotional breakdowns, or cold feet taken to a tragic extreme. But the story didn't end there. That night, long after everyone had gone, Aaron sat alone on the sand where they'd been married. He hadn't cried. He hadn't moved. Just stared at the water like he expected her to rise from it. Then, just before dawn, he found something. Washed up on the shore was her bouquet. White roses soaked and decayed, threaded through with small clumps of seaweed. Wrapped around the stem was a note. Not written. Carved. It read, "I kept my promise. I'm free now." Aaron didn't understand. Not at first, but the phrase gnawed at him. It felt familiar. Buried. Forgotten. When he returned to the house they had rented for the weekend, he went through Elise's things, her suitcase, her journal, even her old books. He was looking for anything that would explain why she walked into the ocean like she was going home. He found it in an old letter, folded inside the back of a sketchbook. It was dated 2004.
Elise would have been about 13 at the time. It was addressed not to a person, but to the sea. I made the pact when I was a girl. I said the words. I gave the blood. You promised me love. And in return, I promised I'd come back to you. On the day I gave myself to another, I would come back. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. There were drawings, too, crude, childlike. A figure standing at the edge of the ocean. Another, darker shape beneath the waves. A twisted smile with far too many teeth. Aaron went numb. He showed the letter to Elise's parents, but they brushed it off. She had an active imagination, they said. She used to talk to the sea like it was her friend. But something in their voice, too casual, too quick, suggested they knew more than they admitted. A week later, Aaron returned to the shoreline alone. The beach was empty, overcast. The air held a sharp, briny chill that hadn't been there before. He sat where Elise had stood, watching the waves roll in. Then, from beneath the foam, something surfaced. Not a person, not a creature, a dress. Elise's wedding gown floated toward the shore, still intact, still ivory, not tattered or waterlogged as it should have been. He touched it, and the fabric was dry. That night, he dreamed of her. Elise, standing ankle-deep in black water, her eyes entirely white. She didn't speak, but her mouth moved. I kept my promise. I'm free now. Aaron moved out of their apartment 2 weeks later. He tried to put it behind him, to convince himself it was a psychotic break, that she had drowned, and the rest was grief, hallucination. But every year, on their anniversary, something strange happened. Roses would appear, fresh white roses, wrapped in seaweed, left at his doorstep. No one ever saw who placed them. No note, no tracks, just the flowers and the scent of salt water. And each time, they'd bloom for exactly one night, then turn black by morning. They say your wedding day is the most unforgettable day of your life. For Anna and Mark, that turned out to be true in a way no one could have imagined. The ceremony took place at an ivy-covered estate tucked deep in the Vermont woods. It was old, built in the early 1800s, and had been converted into a wedding venue after decades of disuse. The owners bragged that it had real character, but some guests noted the way the halls stayed cold no matter the weather, or how the shadows lingered too long in the corners. Anna had hired a local videographer named Seth. Young, artistic, and known for his eerie, cinematic wedding reels. His style was moody, dreamlike, almost supernatural in its use of sound and light. That's what Anna loved about him. She wanted her wedding to feel like a memory from another lifetime. Seth arrived early, with an old-fashioned shoulder camera and a strange metal tripod that creaked when it extended. He was polite, quiet, and very focused. He moved through the pre-ceremony rooms like a shadow, capturing the bride adjusting her veil, the groom nervously pacing, the creak of the doors as the guests arrived. His presence was barely noticeable until it wasn't. Halfway through the ceremony, as Anna and Mark exchanged their vows beneath a towering oak tree in the estate's back garden, something shifted. Guests described a strange drop in temperature, like someone had opened a door to winter. The officiant's voice crackled with static through the sound system, though there were no electronics near it. And then, Seth stopped filming. One of the groomsmen noticed it first. Seth had walked away from the couple mid-vow, lens still recording. Not hurriedly, just calmly stepping backward, as if following something through the trees behind the crowd. At first, people thought he was just getting a better angle. But he never came back. The ceremony finished. The couple kissed. Applause erupted. But when the music swelled and the guests turned to look for Seth, he was gone. Hours passed. Calls went to voicemail. No one had seen him leave. His tripod remained, partially collapsed near the reception tent. His car was still parked near the venue service road, untouched, When the estate's staff reviewed the exterior security footage later that night, they found something unsettling. Seth had never exited the property. Instead, the last glimpse of him was captured by a camera pointed toward the back tree line. He was walking steadily, eyes wide and unblinking, into the woods. Behind him, no one followed. But just before he vanished beneath the canopy, the footage glitched. For precisely 4 seconds, the screen went black. The next morning, a search party combed the area. Nothing, not a trace of his footsteps. No gear, no clothing. Only a single object was found, stuck in a tree not about 50 yards from the ceremony site. A wedding invitation, curled and brittle with moisture, addressed to Seth Elliott in looping handwriting. But Anna never sent him a physical invite. She had emailed him. Then came the footage. 2 weeks after the wedding, a package arrived at Anna and Mark's home. No return address. Inside, a single, unmarked flash drive. The files were strange, short clips, each roughly 10 to 15 seconds long, out of order, shaky. No ceremony footage, just fragments, blurred faces, guests staring into the camera with expressions that didn't match the moment. Wide eyes, open mouths, hands trembling slightly, as if caught in fear. One clip showed the bride's mother standing alone in the garden, her face turned upward. She was mouthing something silently, over and over. Another clip was the oak tree, but the ceremony wasn't happening. No decorations, no chairs, just the tree, and standing beneath it, barefoot and motionless, was a woman in a black wedding dress, her face obscured by a long, tattered veil. The footage was grainy, full of digital noise, but her head tilted slowly as if she sensed she was being watched. Then it cut to black. The couple took the drive to the police. For weeks, nothing came of it, until one night, Anna received an email. It was from Seth's account. "I found the bride," it read. Attached was a single image, an extreme close-up of an eye, bloodshot and wet. Reflected in the pupil was a mirror, and in the mirror, the same woman in black. The authorities traced the email's origin to a location deep within the Vermont woods, near an abandoned chapel once used for spiritual retreats in the 1930s. But when a team arrived, they found the place burned out. A fire had destroyed most of the structure decades ago, yet strange items remained. Melted camera lenses, ruined wedding programs from a ceremony dated October 12, 1934, and in the ashes near the altar, a charred piece of film strip. When it was cleaned and scanned, it revealed just a few seconds of footage. A man, holding a camera, walking slowly toward a veiled woman standing in an empty room. No sound, no color, just motion and silence. The man bears a striking resemblance to Seth, but older, gaunt, and pale. That was the last trace of him. To this day, Anna and Mark never received a proper wedding video. But sometimes, late at night, Anna swears she hears a faint whirring sound in her living room, as if an old camera is still rolling. Once she woke up to find their TV on, showing static, with one frame frozen beneath the snow. A woman in black, standing under the oak tree. She was staring directly into the screen, and she was smiling. The chapel was small, tucked away in the fog-covered hills of a quiet town in Vermont. A white stone relic of the 1800s, it hadn't held a wedding in nearly a decade, yet it still carried the lingering weight of vows, hymns, and something else, something that made the walls feel too close and the air strangely heavy. Elliot and Mary Ann were the kind of couple people described as meant to be, a phrase thrown around so carelessly it loses meaning. But in their case, it rang true. Childhood neighbors turned college sweethearts. Their families practically raised them side by side. When Elliot proposed on a cold October night under a veil of stars, she said yes before he could finish the question. But Marianne had a secret, not the kind that can be written off with a smirk or forgiven with time. This one dug deep, buried in her past like a bone unearthed by accident. She had tried to forget it, tried to seal it away with layers of normalcy and routine. And for the most part, it worked, until she set foot in the chapel. The first sign came during rehearsal. The church bell, a rusted antique that hadn't worked in years, suddenly rang out as she walked down the aisle alone. Everyone laughed, assuming it was the wind. But Marianne knew better. That sound had echoed once before, on the night of her sister's funeral. Her sister, Elise, had died in that very town, not far from the chapel, drowned in a lake when they were teens. It was ruled an accident, but Marianne had never told anyone the truth. They had argued that night. Elise had threatened to expose something that involved a boy they both knew. A moment of anger turned into shoves, screams, and then silence as Elise's body vanished into the still, black water. Marianne was never caught, and no one ever asked questions. Elise's name slowly faded from conversation, except in Marianne's head. On the day of the wedding, the sky was a perfect gray, thin clouds casting a cool light through the stained glass windows. The guests arrived in soft murmurs, dressed in pastel blues and charcoals. The air inside the church was cold, even though the furnace groaned faintly beneath the floorboards. Elliot stood at the altar with a calm smile, nervously adjusting his cuffs. He hadn't seen Marianne yet that day. It was tradition, but when she finally appeared at the entrance of the chapel, silence fell.
She looked radiant, yes, but there was something in her expression that gave a few people pause. A tightness around the eyes, a glance toward the rafters, as if listening for something just beyond human hearing. Her bouquet was slightly wilted. Still, the ceremony proceeded. The vows were spoken, trembling and beautiful. The ring exchange went smoothly, and then came the kiss, a moment of celebration. Flashbulbs, clapping, laughter. Elliot leaned forward and kissed his bride, and then he collapsed. At first, everyone thought it was part of the emotion, too much excitement, a swoon. But the way his body crumpled was all wrong. Heavy. Final. He hit the floor with a dull thud that silenced the chapel instantly. Marianne stood frozen. The priest dropped to his knees, checking Elliot's pulse. Someone screamed. Others rushed forward, phones dialing for help. But Elliot was already gone. No blood, no visible wounds. Just gone. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They couldn't find a cause. No heart attack. No allergic reaction. His body was perfectly healthy, except for the complete absence of life. The autopsy revealed something bizarre. Elliot's brain activity had ceased at the exact moment his lips touched Marianne's. Instant shutdown, like a switch flipped. It made no medical sense. Marianne was questioned repeatedly, but no charges were filed. The death was listed as unexplained sudden cardiac arrest. A medical shrug, but the town had theories. The florist said the flowers in Marianne's bouquet had withered overnight, despite being fresh the day before. A photographer claimed that in several photos, a pale face could be seen behind Marianne, just behind her veil, in the area where no one was standing. And then there were the guests who swore they heard whispers echoing through the chapel before Elliot fell. Not in English, something older, a language that didn't belong. The chapel was closed again after that. No more weddings, no more services. Locals said the bell never stopped ringing for 3 nights straight, even though the rope had been removed decades ago. Marianne disappeared from the public eye, moved out of state, changed her name. But some say she visits the lake every year on the anniversary of her wedding. Just stands at the edge, silent, holding a bouquet of lilies that wilt the moment she picks them. As for Elliot, well, some things are better left buried. But there's one more thing. Months later, a maintenance worker returned to the chapel to clear out the last of the pews. He noticed a strange mark on the floor where Elliot had fallen. A blackened, circular scorch no more than 6 inches wide. It wasn't there before. Beneath the wood, he found the remnants of a symbol carved into the foundation, a sigil dating back to pagan rites of union and sacrifice. He brought it up to the town council. They had it filled with cement and the record scrubbed clean. But when they reviewed the wedding footage, which had only captured fragments of the day, there was one chilling anomaly. The moment Elliot kissed Marianne, the camera glitched, and for exactly 1 second, the video reversed. A flickering rewind. And in that 1 second of backward time, Marianne smiled. Not a grin, not a smirk, a knowing smile. Quiet, cold, as if something had been completed, a debt repaid. And then she blinked, slowly, while the world carried on. You might believe in coincidence, in tragedy without cause, in grief without guilt. But some kisses seal more than love. Some secrets, when shared, demand payment. And sometimes, the one you vow to spend forever with never even gets the chance.
It began innocently enough. Sarah was a bride on a tight budget, but her heart was set on having the perfect wedding. After weeks of searching, she found a beautiful vintage wedding dress at a small boutique tucked away in a quiet part of town. The dress was exquisite, lace so delicate it seemed spun from spider silk, intricate beadwork that shimmered faintly even under dull light, and a timeless elegance that no new dress could match. What made it even better was the price. Far less than she expected, and the boutique owner assured her it had been gently worn only once. Sarah didn't think twice. The dress was perfect, but from the moment she brought it home, something about the dress felt off. It started subtly. The lace would seem to shift and wrinkle when no one was touching it. Sometimes, she swore she caught the faint scent of damp earth and old wood when she held it close. Most unsettling of all, every time she tried it on, the mirror reflected something strange behind her, shadows that stretched and bent unnaturally. But when she turned around, there was nothing there. Sarah brushed it off as nerves. After all, wedding planning was stressful, but the dress seemed to grow heavier on her shoulders with every passing day, as if it carried a weight she couldn't understand. The night before the wedding, Sarah dreamed of a woman in the same dress, pale, eyes hollow, standing silently in a forest of twisted trees. The woman's lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, the dress whispered, a soft, sibilant hiss that Sarah could almost understand. She woke up drenched in cold sweat, the whispered words lingering in her mind like a dark promise. The wedding day arrived, bright and sunny, a perfect contrast to the growing unease that clung to Sarah. But as she stepped into the dress for the final time, the heaviness returned, settling deep in her chest. She tried to shake it off and focused on the joy that surrounded her. The smiles, the flowers, the warm embrace of friends and family. The ceremony began smoothly, but as Sarah walked down the aisle, she noticed something strange. Guests shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting nervously toward the back of the church. She glanced over her shoulder and froze. At the entrance stood a woman, dressed exactly like Sarah, in the same vintage wedding gown. Her face was pale and gaunt, eyes black as pits, and a haunting, sorrowful smile stretched across her lips. No one else seemed to notice her. Sarah's heart hammered, her breath caught. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs moved forward, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. The doppelganger's smile deepened as she stepped inside, slowly, deliberately. The woman began to move through the crowd like a shadow slipping through cracks, But wherever she passed, the air grew cold and the light dimmed. Flowers wilted, candles flickered and died. By the time Sarah reached the altar, the woman was gone, but the damage was done. That night, after the reception, Sarah found a note folded neatly inside the dress's pocket. The handwriting was spidery and uneven. She wore this dress once before you. She loved him too, but the dress kept what he took. The curse is stitched in the seams, and now it belongs to you. Sarah's fingers trembled as she read the words. The curse? She laughed nervously. This was just superstition. But then the nightmares began. Each night, Sarah was haunted by the woman in the dress. In her dreams, the forest twisted and writhed, and the woman whispered secrets of heartbreak, betrayal, and loss. Sarah learned the story. Years ago, the original bride had been left at the altar, her heart shattered and her spirit broken. She returned to the church, wearing the same dress, and vanished without a trace. Locals spoke of a curse, one that haunted the dress, passing from bride to bride, forever trapping the sorrow of that forgotten woman. Sarah's days grew darker. Shadows clung to her like a second skin. Friends began to notice her change. She grew distant, withdrawn, her laughter hollow. Strange accidents followed her, glass shattering, unexplained cold drafts, whispers just beyond hearing. At the reception hall, photographs from the day revealed something disturbing. In every picture, the same pale woman appeared in the background, sometimes smiling sadly, sometimes glaring fiercely. No one else could see her, but the camera never lied. As the weeks passed, Sarah's health declined. Doctors found no explanation for the fatigue and chills, and the dress remained locked away in her closet, yet the weight of it pressed down on her soul. One night, Sarah returned home to find the dress laid out in the center of her living room floor, clean and pristine as ever, but glowing faintly with a sickly green light. On the mirror, written in fog, were the words, "You can't escape what you wear." Desperate, Sarah sought out the boutique where she had bought the dress. The owner was gone, replaced by a shuttered storefront with no sign of ever reopening. The neighbors whispered about a woman who had vanished, leaving behind only a cursed dress. Sarah realized the dress was never just secondhand. It was second chance, second life, for a spirit trapped between this world and the next, bound by the anguish of a broken promise. The curse had chosen her, and it was patient. The wedding reception was supposed to be a celebration of love and new beginnings. The venue, a grand old mansion nestled just outside the town, was known for its elegant charm and vintage style. Its ornate decorations and antique fixtures made it a popular choice for couples wanting a classic, timeless wedding. But that night, something else lingered in the air, something dark and unsettling, barely whispered about by those who attended. The bride and groom, Emily and Jason, had chosen a mansion because of its stunning ballroom. It was lined with gilded mirrors stretching from floor to ceiling. The largest mirror, an imposing piece with intricate carvings of twisting vines and faces frozen in silent screams, hung behind the head table where the couple sat. The guests admired it, remarking how the glass seemed almost too clear, as if it was reflecting more than just their own images. As the evening unfolded, guests mingled, drank champagne, and laughed under the glittering chandeliers. But some noticed something strange, something unsettling in the mirror's reflection. At first it was subtle, a shadow behind the bride's back, a dark shape that flickered just beyond the groom's shoulder. When they glanced directly, there was nothing there, only the smiling faces of Emily and Jason, the bridal party, and the joyous crowd. But as the night deepened, the reflections began to shift. One guest, an older woman named Martha, was among the first to speak up. She claimed she saw a figure hanging behind the newlyweds in the mirror's reflection. The figure was vague at first, a silhouette with a motionless body suspended by a noose. The chilling part was that the figure wasn't visible in the room itself. The ballroom was empty behind the couple. Only the mirror showed it. Martha described it as a pale face, eyes sunken and lifeless, the mouth open in a silent scream. The noose was tight around the neck, and the figure's feet dangled inches above the floor. Others who had glanced at the mirror at the same time agreed with her, though some dismissed it as a trick of the light or a collective imagination fueled by too much champagne. The bride and groom were told, but they laughed it off. Jason joked it was just a Halloween prank from the venue staff. Emily, more uneasy, insisted they check the mirror after the reception to prove nothing was there. But the whispers didn't stop. As the night wore on, more guests reported seeing the hanging figure. Some said they saw it when the music swelled, others when the lights flickered. A photographer even caught a fleeting image of the silhouette in one of the reception photos, a blurry shape hanging eerily behind the happy couple. Curiosity turned into dread when the venue staff, after everyone left, examined the mirror closely. They found a small, barely noticeable scratch on the frame. Beneath it was a faded inscription, words carved into the wood, almost erased by time. The inscription read, "Bound by sorrow, trapped in glass, the reflection of a life undone." That discovery sent chills through the staff. They remembered a story, an old local legend about the mansion. Decades ago, a young man named Samuel had been engaged to marry the mansion owner's daughter. But days before the wedding, Samuel mysteriously disappeared. Rumors said he had been caught in a forbidden love affair, or that he had been driven mad by family secrets. The night before his disappearance, witnesses claimed to have seen him on the mansion's balcony, struggling with unseen torment. The next morning, his body was found hanging, an apparent suicide, though with some suspected foul play. His spirit, they say, never left the mansion. Some locals believe the giant ballroom mirror was crafted from glass that trapped Samuel's restless soul. They say his reflection is cursed to replay his final moments, a dark echo visible only to those who dare to look too closely. The newlyweds had unknowingly chosen a wedding venue steeped in tragedy, and the guests became unwitting witnesses to a supernatural replay of a death long past. What made the story even more unsettling was that Emily began to feel strange in the days after the wedding. She swore she saw shadows moving in the corners of her vision and heard faint whispers late at night, as if Samuel's sorrow had followed her home. But no one else could see the figure. Only those who had been at the reception had glimpsed the hanging man in the mirror, caught between two worlds, forever reflected, forever silent. The day started like any other wedding, bright, joyful, and filled with anticipation. Emma and Jake had planned their perfect day for months. The venue was an old, elegant manor nestled deep in the countryside, a place with history and charm. They wanted an intimate gathering, just close family and friends. The guest list was carefully curated. No strangers, no unexpected faces. The sun was warm as guests arrived, smiles and laughter drifting through the air like light music. The ceremony was held in the manor's ancient garden, surrounded by blooming roses and towering oaks. Emma's white dress shimmered in the afternoon light, and Jake's nervous grin softened as he looked at her. Everyone took pictures. A professional photographer captured every moment. The walk down the aisle, the exchange of vows, the kiss that sealed their promise, and the group shots with family and friends. The photos would later fill their albums, frozen memories of a day they hoped would last forever. But something wasn't right. It began subtly. Emma's mother, as she flipped through the printed photos a few days after the wedding, froze on one particular image. The group photo taken in the garden, all the smiling faces of loved ones, and yet behind them, standing just at the edge of the frame, was a woman dressed entirely in black. Her presence was unsettling. She wore an old-fashioned, long black dress with lace details that seemed out of place. Her hair was dark and pulled back tightly, her pale face almost expressionless. But what chilled Emma's mother the most was the woman's eyes, deep, hollow pools that seemed to pierce through the lens and into the soul. No one invited her. Emma whispered when she saw the photo. The family laughed nervously at first, blaming a trick of the light or a shadow. But the woman wasn't just in one photo. As the weeks passed, more pictures surfaced, each revealing the same figure. She appeared behind the bride and groom during their first dance, standing near the cake table, and even in the candid shots taken during the reception. Sometimes her face was clearer, sometimes blurred, but always unmistakably there. Emma's best friend, Sarah, took photos on her phone at the after-party. When she reviewed them later, the woman in black appeared, standing just behind the newlyweds, her presence casting a cold shadow that seemed to swallow the light around her. Panic began to settle in. Emma and Jake tried to rationalize it. Maybe it's a guest in a black dress, Jake suggested. Someone who stayed late or slipped in unnoticed. But no one remembered seeing anyone like her. No one had invited the woman in black. One evening, Emma found an old, dust-covered photo album tucked away in the manor's attic. It belonged to the original owners, a family who had lived there nearly a century ago. The pages yellowed with age. The photos told stories of celebrations, tragedies, and whispered secrets. And there, in a faded black and white wedding photo, was the woman in black. She stood alone, her gaze fixed beyond the frame, her presence both haunting and sorrowful. A name was scrawled beneath the picture in elegant handwriting, Lydia Hartwell. Emma's curiosity grew darker. She searched the local archives and discovered Lydia was a bride who had vanished from her own wedding at the manor nearly 100 years ago. No one knew where she had gone or why. Rumors spoke of heartbreak, betrayal, and a curse that lingered over the manor grounds. They say Lydia's spirit never left the place where she was meant to start her new life, waiting, watching, and appearing whenever a wedding was held in her absence. Emma started noticing strange things around the manor. Cold spots that prickled her skin, whispers that vanished when she turned to listen, and the faint scent of lavender, Lydia's favorite flower, even though no flowers had been placed in certain rooms. One night, as Emma and Jake stayed behind to clean up after their reception, the lights flickered and a soft, mournful humming echoed through the hallways. Emma felt a presence behind her and turned sharply, but saw nothing. When she looked back at her phone, a new photo appeared in her gallery. It was of the empty ballroom, yet standing just beyond the doorway was the woman in black. Emma's heart pounded. She realized this wasn't just a figure trapped in photographs. Lydia's spirit was bound to the manor, attached to every wedding that dared to take place there, forever haunting the joyous occasions she never got to live. The woman in black wasn't just a ghost in the pictures. She was a silent witness, a chilling reminder of a love that was never fulfilled in a day forever frozen in time. Emma wondered, was Lydia warning them, seeking justice? Or was she trapped in an endless loop of watching other brides and grooms say their vows while she remained unseen and unheard? Every photo was a glimpse into a past that refused to stay buried, a past that haunted the present with shadows that grew darker with each frame. And no one invited the woman in black. The day started like a dream. Everything was flawless. The sun was shining just right, the flowers were in full bloom, and the guests arrived in their finest attire, smiles bright and spirits high. The bride and groom had meticulously planned every detail of their wedding, from the delicate lace on the bride's dress to the exquisite floral arrangements. Everything was perfect. The venue was an old, beautifully restored mansion, nestled deep in the countryside, surrounded by towering trees whose leaves whispered in the soft breeze. The air carried the sweet scent of roses and freshly cut grass. It was exactly the kind of setting a fairy tale is made for. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. The couple exchanged vows beneath an archway dripping with white blossoms. Guests wiped tears of joy as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. The reception that followed was equally magical. Laughter echoed through the grand hall, champagne glasses clinked, and the band played timeless melodies. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow through the tall windows, it was finally time for the piece de resistance, the wedding cake. The cake was a masterpiece, towering 3 tiers high, decorated with delicate sugar flowers and shimmering edible pearls. The cake had been custom-made by a renowned pastry chef, famous for creating desserts as beautiful as they were delicious. The bride and groom stood hand in hand in front of the cake, smiles wide with anticipation. Cameras flashed as they lifted the knife together, slicing into the pristine white icing. But what happened next shattered the perfect evening. Inside the cake, instead of the expected layers of moist sponge and sweet filling, there was something entirely unexpected, something dark and sinister. The cake's interior was filled with what looked like tightly packed strands of thin, black roots. They were tangled, almost like veins, writhing subtly as if alive. A faint, earthy smell seeped from the cake, an odor unlike anything anyone had smelled at a wedding reception before, something damp, decaying, and ancient. Some guests recoiled in horror. Others froze, staring at the grotesque sight in disbelief. The bride gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The groom's smile faltered, replaced by a growing look of confusion and dread. Nobody dared to touch the cake again. The air grew thick with tension, and whispers started spreading like wildfire. What was this strange, organic mass inside the cake? How did it get there? Was it a cruel prank, or something far worse? The truth was far darker than anyone imagined. The mansion where the wedding took place had a hidden history. It wasn't just an elegant venue, but once a home to a secretive family rumored to have dabbled in forbidden rituals, ancient folklore, and dark earth magic. The land beneath the mansion was said to be cursed, with stories told of roots growing unnaturally fast, strangling anything that disturbed them. The cake, it seemed, had somehow become a vessel for those dark roots, an unholy growth seeded by the earth's own ancient curse. The strange thing was, the cake had been delivered from a local bakery known for its use of wild, foraged ingredients. The baker was famous for incorporating local herbs and flowers into their recipes, claiming it gave the desserts a unique flavor and connection to the land. But no one knew the baker had stumbled upon an overgrown, abandoned garden hidden deep in the woods behind the mansion, a place where the roots twisted and writhed beneath the soil like a living nightmare. Somehow, during the process of gathering ingredients for the cake, those roots had been unknowingly harvested and baked into the layers. And when the cake was sliced open, the roots began to reveal their true nature, slowly pulsing, moving beneath the icing as if they wanted to break free. Guests started noticing more odd things. Several reported feeling itchy or uneasy after eating the cake's small fragments. A few developed strange rashes that spread quickly over their skin. Others claimed they began having vivid nightmares, dreams filled with choking vines, suffocating branches, and shadowy figures rising from the earth. The bride's behavior changed too. Once radiant and joyful, she became withdrawn, her eyes hollow and haunted. She spoke little and avoided the mansion's garden, refusing to let anyone near the flowers she had loved so much before the wedding. Days after the event, the groom found a hidden letter tucked beneath the cake stand. The letter was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. It was a warning, one left behind by a previous owner of the mansion. It read, "Beware the roots beneath this ground. They remember every wound, every betrayal. They grow hungry for what is pure and joyous." The cake was never just cake. It is the earth's judgment, the prize for disturbing what sleeps below. No one ever fully explained the letter or the roots in the cake. The bakery closed abruptly. The baker disappeared without a trace. The mansion was abandoned soon after, its grand halls left to rot and be reclaimed by the forest. But the story lives on. Some say that on quiet nights, if you listen closely near the mansion's ruins, you can hear the soft cracking and creeping of roots growing, spreading beneath the soil, waiting for the next perfect wedding to be spoiled, waiting to seep into the sweetness of celebration and twist it into something dark and dreadful. The wedding was perfect, but the cake was a warning, a chilling reminder that some things beneath the surface should never be unearthed. The day had started like any other wedding in the small town of Ashbourne, a place where the fog clings to the hills like a secret, and the trees seem to lean in just a little too close. Elena had always been the kind of woman who believed in forever. When she met Michael, a quiet man with eyes like storm clouds, she thought she had found it. The wedding was set to begin at sunset, an hour when the light turns gold but the shadows already grow long. The old chapel they chose was perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea, its weathered stones whispering of centuries past. Friends and family gathered, their faces bright with joy and anticipation. Michael arrived first, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. Elena watched him from the chapel's wooden pews, heart pounding with a strange mix of hope and something darker, something she couldn't quite name. The air was thick with the scent of salt and pine, and the wind carried an eerie melody, like a lullaby half forgotten. The ceremony began without incident. Vows were exchanged in hushed tones, promises made beneath the stained glass windows that flickered as the sun dipped lower. As Elena slipped the ring onto Michael's finger, a chill ran through her, though no one else seemed to notice. The sky was bleeding orange, a sunset so vivid it felt almost unreal. When they stepped outside, the guests cheered, the sound carrying out across the cliffs. But as they posed for pictures, Elena noticed something odd. Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. He seemed distant, as if his soul was already halfway gone. She reached for his hand, and it was ice cold. The reception was held in a rustic hall nearby, lit by candles that flickered as though struggling against an unseen breath. Music played softly, but Elena found herself unable to enjoy the laughter or the clinking glasses. She kept stealing glances at Michael, whose gaze was fixed on the old window overlooking the cliffs. As night fell, a storm began to gather. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the wind howled like a living thing outside the wooden walls. Guests huddled closer, but Michael's eyes seemed drawn to the window, to the darkness beyond. At midnight, something changed. Michael stood abruptly, excuses mumbling as he slipped outside. Elena followed, heart pounding with dread. The rain had started, cold and relentless, soaking through their clothes as they made their way down the rocky path toward the cliffs. Michael stopped at the edge, staring out over the crashing waves below. He spoke softly, words swallowed by the storm. Elena couldn't hear, but she saw his lips move as if in silent prayer or despair. Then, without warning, Michael stepped forward and vanished. One moment he was there, the next swallowed by the night. Elena screamed, rushing to the cliff's edge, peering into the darkness. The sea roared below, endless and merciless. There was no sign of him, no footprints leading away. Just the storm, the wind, and the cold. The search lasted until dawn, but Michael was never found. When the sun rose, Elena was sitting on the wet rocks, clutching the wedding ring he had left behind. Her eyes, wide and hollow, reflected the pale light. She whispered a question to the morning sky. Why did he die at sunrise? Months later, locals spoke of strange sightings near the cliffs. A shadowy figure walking at twilight, disappearing with the dawn. Some say Michael never truly left, trapped between sunset and sunrise, bound by a promise he could not keep. Elena never remarried. She often returned to that cliff, waiting for a sign, a glimpse of the man she married as the sun fell and before it rose again. They thought the old church was perfect. Weathered stone walls, towering stained glass windows glowing softly in the afternoon sun, and an atmosphere thick with history. For Emma and Daniel, it was exactly the kind of place to start their forever, a beautiful, vintage church that felt like a whisper of the past. It had a charm no modern venue could match. What they didn't know was that beneath those ancient stones, something had been waiting quietly for centuries. The booking process had been easy, almost too easy. The caretaker was an old man who spoke in riddles, warning them vaguely about the church's age, but insisting it was just the right place for love. They laughed it off, chalking his odd behavior to eccentricity. The local townsfolk had a lot of superstitions about that church, stories of shadows that lingered too long and faint chants that floated in the wind. But Emma and Daniel were city people, logical and practical. They didn't believe in ghosts or curses. At least, not yet. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Guests began arriving, admiring the church's grandeur and the soft echo of their footsteps on the cold stone floors. Emma's dress shimmered under the colored light of the stained glass, and Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her. The ceremony started smoothly, the officiant's voice calm and warm, the vows heartfelt and true. But as the service went on, a strange chill settled over the room. No one said a word about it at first, just a subtle drop in temperature, a quiet unease. The candles flickered despite no draft, and the stained glass windows, so full of color minutes before, seemed suddenly dimmed, as if a cloud had passed just outside. Emma felt it most, a prickling sensation crawling up her spine like icy fingers brushing against her skin. Then, just as the couple exchanged rings, a deep rumble shook the church. The floor beneath them trembled ever so slightly, a low vibration almost too faint to notice, but enough to cause a few guests to clutch their chairs. The organ pipes emitted a discordant, haunting note that cut through the silence like a scream. Daniel frowned. "Did you feel that?" he whispered to Emma. She nodded, heart pounding. The officiant paused mid-sentence, eyes wide with a flicker of something unspoken. Guests shifted nervously, glancing toward the altar where a narrow crack suddenly appeared in the stone floor, spreading spiderweb-like under the couple's feet. From that crack came a faint whisper, barely audible, like the breath of someone calling from a distance, but urgent and desperate. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. A low chanting rose, seeming to seep from the stones themselves, words impossible to understand but heavy with menace. Panic began to spread. Some guests moved to leave, but the heavy wooden doors slammed shut on their own, locking them inside. The air thickened with something unseen, pressing in on every breath. The candles extinguished all at once, plunging the church into darkness save for the ghostly glow of the stained glass. Emma's breath hitched. In the dim colors, she saw shadows moving, elongated figures twisting along the walls, reaching out but never fully formed. The whispers became a chorus, voices overlapping in a dreadful symphony. The floor cracked wider, and from the depths below, something began to rise. A cold, damp smell filled the air. The source revealed itself slowly, a dark figure emerging from the widening fissure in the stone. It was humanoid, but distorted, as if time had warped its form. Its eyes glowed faintly blue, hollow yet piercing, locked on Emma and Daniel. The guests screamed, some falling to their knees, others scrambling toward the doors, but the figure's gaze held them frozen. It moved without sound, gliding upward with unnatural grace. Emma stepped forward, heart pounding with a mixture of terror and fascination. She tried to speak, but no words came. The entity's voice echoed inside her mind, a cold, unyielding command. It told of ancient betrayal, of a covenant broken long ago, a curse laid beneath the church to punish the unworthy. Daniel grabbed Emma's hand tightly, grounding her in the moment. "We don't belong here," he said firmly, but the figure only smiled, a slow, dreadful curling of lips that revealed no mouth, only shadow. It whispered that the wedding was a ritual, a trigger to awaken what had slept too long. The union was not meant to be celebrated, but to be the key to unlocking its prison. The couple's love, pure and strong, had unknowingly disturbed the fragile balance. Suddenly, the church trembled violently. Stones cracked, dust falling like snow. The guests screamed louder as the floor beneath them began to collapse into darkness. Emma and Daniel stood firm, the entity reaching out with spectral hands. In that moment, Emma remembered the caretaker's warning, the cryptic just the right place for love, and the strange symbol carved into the church door, resembling an eye with a slash through it. She realized it was a ward, a seal meant to hold the darkness at bay. Frantically, she searched the altar and spotted an old, dusty book tucked beneath the pulpit. She grabbed it and opened to a page marked with the same symbol. The words glowed faintly as she read aloud the ancient incantation written there. The figure recoiled, screeching, retreating back toward the fissure. The chanting ceased. The crack sealed itself slowly, as if the stones were breathing again. The doors creaked open. Silence fell. Guests looked around in disbelief, the chill lifting, colors returning to the stained glass. Emma and Daniel were shaken but alive. The old church seemed to sigh, a weight lifted or perhaps just postponed. They left quickly, never looking back. The caretaker watched from a distance, his eyes heavy with sorrow. What exactly slept beneath that church? Was it truly bound by the ancient words? Or had Emma and Daniel only delayed the inevitable? The old church still stands, silent and brooding on the hill, waiting for the next wedding, the next union, another chance to wake what should remain asleep. It was supposed to be the perfect wedding day. Sun shining, birds chirping, the gentle hum of summer air weaving through the old chapel. Everyone was there, family, friends, and a handful of strangers who'd come from far and wide to witness the union of Emma and James. Emma was radiant, wearing a lace gown that looked like it was spun from moonlight. James stood tall beside her, eyes locked on hers, a smile that didn't quite reach the edges of his lips. The pastor began the ceremony, his voice steady and warm, but no one noticed the heavy silence hanging just beneath the surface, a silence that grew heavier when an unexpected figure appeared. No one had seen the man enter. He was tall, gaunt, dressed in black as if he belonged to another time. His face was pale, almost translucent under the chapel's flickering candlelight, with eyes so dark they seemed to swallow the light. He took a seat in the back row, alone, unmoving. Whispers stirred among the guests. Who was this stranger? No one recognized him. The ceremony pressed on, vows spoken with trembling voices. Emma's heart pounded louder than the pastor's words, a strange knot twisting in her chest. Then, as Emma reached out to take James's hand, the stranger stood abruptly. A single tear traced a dark line down his hollow cheek, glistening unnaturally in the candlelight. No one moved. No one breathed. The man walked slowly toward the altar, his eyes fixed on Emma. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, he stepped forward and whispered a single word, the childhood nickname Emma hadn't heard in decades. Emmy. The word hung in the air, fragile and piercing, like the crack of a fragile glass shattering. Emma's breath hitched. Her hand trembled in James's. How could this man know that name? That private name, used only by her late grandmother, the only person who ever called her Emmy. The room fell into stunned silence. The stranger's gaze pierced Emma like an icy wind, and his whisper came again, this time trembling with sorrow. You forgot me, Emmy. Emma's mind raced. She tried to speak, but no words came. A flood of memories, locked away for years, surged through her, memories she had tried to bury deep in the past. She remembered the orphanage, the long nights alone, and the promise she had made when she was just a child, never to speak of the boy who had vanished without a trace. A boy who had been her closest friend, a boy named Eli. The stranger's eyes softened, and he spoke again, voice barely audible. I waited for you all these years. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. The pastor cleared his throat, but no one could tear their eyes away from the stranger and Emma. Something about him was not right, as if he was a ghost tethered to a secret past. Suddenly, Emma's knees buckled. James caught her just in time, whispering her name. She looked up, and for the first time, fear eclipsed the joy in her eyes. Who are you? She managed to whisper, voice cracking. The stranger's mouth curled into a sad smile. I'm the one you left behind. Then he turned, and before anyone could react, he vanished, fading into the shadows like mist dissolving at dawn. The chapel erupted in chaos. Guests rushed to the altar, but there was no trace of the stranger. Emma collapsed into James's arms, tears streaming down her face. Her grandmother's nickname echoed endlessly in her mind, but more hauntingly, so did the boy's name. Eli. No one ever saw the stranger again. But Emma never forgot the chilling moment when her past came alive and a forgotten friendship demanded to be remembered. She always believed in forever. From the moment Lily and Mark met, it was like the universe conspired to weave their fates together. Their story was one that friends envied. Two souls destined to be, their love almost too perfect to be real. The wedding was set on an autumn afternoon, a golden haze settling over the small town where everyone knew everyone. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But forever, she learned, can sometimes come with a price. Mark was quiet but kind, not the type to make grand gestures. But his actions spoke louder than words. He was deeply protective of Lily, and they shared a bond that felt ancient, as if something beyond this life held them close. She had no reason to doubt him. The engagement ring was simple but elegant, a band of worn silver, its surface darkened with age, yet polished enough to gleam in the sunlight. When Mark slipped it on her finger, she thought she could see the future reflected in that cold metal. A future full of love, laughter, and endless tomorrows. What Lily didn't know was that the ring carried a secret Mark never dared to speak aloud. Weeks before the wedding, strange things began to happen. At first, they were subtle, little oddities that she brushed off as nerves or exhaustion. A sudden chill in the room when no windows were open. Whispered voices so faint she questioned her own sanity. Shadows that flickered just at the edge of her vision. One night, she woke to the feeling of someone watching her. Her bedroom was still except for the faintest sound, a scratching noise coming from the dresser drawer where Mark kept the ring box. She sat up, heart pounding, and noticed the ring was missing from her finger. Confused and alarmed, she opened the drawer. Inside was the ring, but something was wrong. The silver band had turned almost black, as if charred by fire. In the center, where a tiny gemstone once sparkled, there was now a fine layer of ash, delicate and gray. She held in her hand, a cold weight pressing down on her chest. Was it some strange reaction? A chemical mishap? But the ash looked real. Real enough to crumble between her fingers. Desperate for answers, Lily confronted Mark. His face went pale when she showed him the ring. "It's from my family," he confessed in a low voice. "An old tradition, something I thought was lost to time." Mark told her about the ring's dark history. Generations ago, his ancestors had been part of a secret society, an ancient brotherhood bound by an unbreakable oath. The silver ring, crafted centuries ago, was passed down to each groom before their wedding day. But the ring was no ordinary symbol of love. It was forged over the ashes of a broken promise. The original owner, a man named Elias, had betrayed his bride. To atone, he burned the ring and mixed his regrets into the molten silver. Ever since, every groom who wore it carried a fragment of that curse, a fragment that could bind a soul forever or consume it entirely. Mark said he never believed the stories. He thought it was just folklore, a superstition his grandmother whispered on stormy nights. But after his father's sudden death and strange occurrences around his family estate, Mark grew wary. The ash inside the ring was the key. It wasn't just symbolic. It was said to contain the essence of betrayal and eternal sorrow. Anyone who wore the ring was marked. Their promise of forever was a trap, a vow bound by an unholy pact. Lily felt the weight of those words settle over her like a storm cloud. On the morning of the wedding, as guests gathered beneath the amber canopy of trees, she tried to push the darkness away. The ceremony began as planned. Vows were exchanged, smiles flashed, and the world seemed to hold its breath. But when Mark slid the ring onto her finger again, the coldness seeped deep into her skin. Throughout the reception, Lily felt eyes watching her. Not just the guests, but something else. Something unseen lurking in the corners, in the flicker of candlelight, in the rustle of leaves outside the windows. As the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted. The joyous laughter twisted into uneasy silence. Guests reported hearing soft crying from the bridal suite. A shadowy figure appeared in the photographs, always standing just behind Mark, its features blurred and indistinct. That night, Lily awoke from a restless sleep. The room was dark, but the ring on her finger glowed faintly, an eerie ember pulsing beneath the surface. Mark was gone. She found a note on the dresser, written in his hurried handwriting. "I'm sorry. I tried to fight it, but the curse is real. The ring holds a part of me, trapped between worlds. I don't know if I'll ever come back. Please protect yourself." Fear gripped her as she looked at the ring, now growing hotter against her skin as if alive. She tried to remove it, but it wouldn't budge. Days passed, and Lily's world spiraled into a waking nightmare. Her reflection began to warp. Shadows clung to her like a second skin. Whispered voices filled the quiet moments, voices begging, warning, mourning. Each time she touched the ring, memories surfaced. Visions of Elias's betrayal, the burning of the original ring, the agony of endless regret passed down like a poison. She realized the ring wasn't just a symbol. It was a prison. It held the souls of all who had broken their vows, all who had suffered beneath its curse. Mark's disappearance was no accident. The ring demanded a sacrifice, someone to bear its burden, to carry the curse forward, trapped in the endless cycle of promises made and broken. Lily's isolation deepened. Her friends stopped calling. Her family avoided her calls. The town whispered rumors of the cursed bride who never smiled. She knew the truth. The ring was binding her to a fate darker than death, a forever that was no gift, but a prison of ash and silence. At night, she swore she heard Mark's voice calling her, caught somewhere between worlds, trapped by the same cursed vow. And the ring? It pulsed faintly on her finger, ashes inside shifting like embers in a dying fire, waiting. Forever, she thought bitterly, was never meant to be a promise of happiness. It was a warning. It was a small-town wedding, the kind where the whole community shows up, even if they barely know the bride and groom. Ava and Lucas had grown up there, childhood sweethearts, everyone's favorite couple. So when the day finally came, there wasn't an empty seat in the town hall. The ceremony had been beautiful, maybe too beautiful, in a way that felt almost artificial. There was something too pristine about it all. The sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows didn't feel warm. It felt staged, like a memory someone had rehearsed too many times. No one thought anything of it until the reception. The first thing guests noticed was the DJ. No one recognized him. Not a local, dressed in a charcoal suit, clean-cut, pale. He didn't speak a word, not even when the best man tried to shake his hand. Just nodded and pressed play on the first track. It was a slow, elegant tune, something classical but unfamiliar. And it felt off, like it wasn't being played but remembered. People started dancing anyway. The usual shuffling of feet, laughing, kids running between tables. But slowly, as the track continued, the mood began to shift. One by one, guests began to slow down, not just in dancing, but in movement, like their limbs were lagging behind their thoughts. Conversations began to stutter, people repeating the same lines like they were forgetting what they had just said. It wasn't long before someone, Lucas's uncle, collapsed mid-step. No one noticed right away. They just kept dancing. Then the lights dimmed and the music cut. Silence. And then the same song started again, in reverse. It didn't sound distorted. It sounded perfect, perfectly backwards. But more than that, it felt intentional. Like the music was unraveling something, undoing something. And that's when the doors locked. At first, they thought it was just a malfunction. A prank, maybe. But when people tried the windows, they wouldn't budge. Even the emergency exits refused to open. One of the groomsmen tried smashing the kitchen window with a chair, and the chair snapped in half. Panic began to rise, slowly, like water flooding a basement. Yet even in their growing dread, no one could fully stop dancing. Feet kept sliding. Shoulders kept swaying. Some people cried while they moved. Some screamed, but their bodies wouldn't let them be still. Ava stood by the cake, still in her wedding dress, completely still. Her eyes were open, unblinking, her arms trembling. Lucas was nowhere to be seen. And then something strange began to happen. The music, still playing in reverse, began to pull time with it. People's movements reversed too, subtly at first. A spilled drink reformed in a glass. A broken wine glass unshattered itself on the floor. Laughter that had happened 20 minutes ago echoed again. A joke repeated. A toast was somehow made again, word for word, with the champagne reappearing in every flute. Then came the realization. They weren't just stuck. They were being rewound. Memories fractured. Guests began recognizing people they hadn't seen in decades. Dead relatives, lost friends, even childhood versions of themselves flickered across the dance floor for split seconds. One woman screamed as she saw her first husband, long buried, clapping in the shadows. A child, no older than 6, tugged at her dress. "You said you'd never come back here," the child said. Some people broke down. Others ran for corners that no longer existed. A waiter was seen trying to crawl under a table and vanished completely beneath it. And Ava, still motionless, except now, tears streamed down her face, completely silent. When someone finally reached her, she whispered only one word. He knew. Then came the flickering. The chandeliers above began to pulse, not with light, but with shadow. Long, twitching shadows that danced faster than the guests ever could. The walls cracked, but in reverse, sealing themselves up rather than breaking apart. The room was shrinking imperceptibly, inch by inch. The air got tighter, heavier, colder. The DJ remained at his station, motionless. Still no expression, no emotion, just his finger on the vinyl, guiding it counterclockwise. Every once in a while, he'd look up, only his eyes moving, and focus on someone in the crowd. Every time he did, that person would freeze, stuck in a loop, laughing silently, nodding, sipping an invisible drink over and over. Eventually, someone, Ava's cousin, got too close to the DJ booth. As he stepped forward, the track jumped, not in sound, but in effect. Everyone lurched backward. The bride's bouquet flew back into her hands. The sliced cake reassembled itself. And then Ava screamed. It wasn't the scream of pain. It was the scream of knowing. "This isn't the first time," she said, her voice cracking through the chaos. "We've done this before, over and over. It always ends the same." Someone demanded answers, screamed at her, but Ava looked broken, not in grief, but in resignation. "We danced for the first time when I was 7. I stepped into the wrong room at the old town hall. The floor was empty. The music was playing, and I danced. They said I was missing for 3 hours, but I never left the floor." She turned slowly toward the DJ, whose eyes locked with hers. "He promised me a perfect day. I was a child. I said yes." Suddenly, the floor buckled slightly. Not enough to trip anyone, but enough to shift something. People stopped talking. All at once, they understood. This wasn't a wedding. It was an offering. And every time the music reversed, it claimed more. The guests weren't guests. They were shadows in waiting. Extras in a story told endlessly. Each one brought in by someone who had once made a deal. A wish for perfection. For love that lasts forever. For a moment that never ends. And that's exactly what they got. A loop. A dance. Frozen in time, playing backward forever. A final song no one ever remembered asking for. And still, even now, they sway, smiling and screaming at once. A blur of joy and terror. A celebration locked in purgatory. Some say if you walk past the old town hall at night, you'll hear music faintly playing in reverse. And if you step inside, make sure you don't dance. Because the moment you take a step, you become part of the last song. And the last dance never ends.